Hi folks, and welcome back to Fishing with Den. Well, we've reached the third and final part of the tutorial on how to make loaded bodied wagglers, and as you can see from down here, I've got all 15 or 3 sets of wagglers now finished off. What we're going to have to do next, if I just show you down here, we're going to have to finish off making the tips. Now, as you can see, because I had these previously, I have actually got some which were already made up and which I'm going to retain. There's no point in throwing these away. But what I've done is I've split them into sections, which are the short bamboo, medium bamboo, long bamboo, and then these are the ones which are made out of the plastic inserts, and these are the ones which are made of balsa. Now, I've taken the time to cut all of the bits and pieces for each of the different types. And we're going to go through now and we're going to show you how to make each of them. So first of all then, we're going to do the straightforward bamboo tips. And these ones are 45, 55 and 75 millimeters long. And as you can see, I've got yellow tips, black tips and red tips. You can make multiples of them if you want, just in case you think you might lose one. But frankly, I've got enough to make here, so if I ever do lose one, I will actually just make them as I go. First thing to do then, take the bamboo, just round off the top, like so. Same at the bottom. And then when you're happy, and you've done all of these, then you can actually start to do the painting on them. I'll get those done in a minute, but let's go on to the next section, which are the slightly thicker inserts. And as I said, these are the ones that are made out of these tubes from the ballpoint pens. Remember, when you're doing these, always sand down the outside of these tubes so there's a roughness there, otherwise the paint won't stick. And again, all we're going to do here is take some of these small pieces of bamboo, insert them into both short and long versions of these tips. And in fact, if you look at these black ones here, you may actually have realised that when I cut off the sections of the floats, these are the top sections, and they're going to now form the tips, which just waste not want not on that one. We will need to put some little blocking pieces in the top, because obviously you can't leave them open, otherwise they'll fill up with water. But they're just a question of being glued in and then painted over. Then finally we get to the thicker tips. These are the ones that are made out of balsa, and similarly we'll be using these inserts. We've got to cut these balsa pieces. Now, in actual fact, I'd forgotten that, so just bear with me. These are about 70 millimeters in length, plus the section of bamboo there. I will be shaping those, but I've already shown you how to shape things, so I won't go into any detail on that. So I've rounded off all the bamboo tip sections, and now we're ready to start gluing these inserts into the thicker tips. Now, these inserts can come under quite a lot of pressure. Obviously, we're going to be using this section here to insert into the float, and it can be relatively tight. Shouldn't be too tight, obviously, but sometimes people do make them a little bit too tight, and so they do come under pressure. And even using the 2.5mm drill bit, that may not score it sufficiently. So these ones need to be really, really secure. And to do that, you need one of these. This is my special tool, otherwise known as a safety pin. And what I've done is I've just taken this little piece at the end here and bent it over so it's not quite at a right angle, and hopefully you can see enough to be able to make one. It's nothing special. And what I'm going to do is, if I take this one, I'll get a bit closer for you. If I take this one, insert it, and then put pressure against here like this, and then just twist and move it up and down inside the body. There we go. Now, because I haven't already done the outside of this one, hopefully you can see that this has a good scoring on the inside now. And this actually does make for a very, very tough fit. Starting with these smaller, shorter inserts then, take one of the bamboo pieces and just dip it in the glue. Get a good amount on and just insert and leave something like about 1 centimetre showing. If you have it slightly long, that's okay. I'll just get rid of that drip. If it is slightly long, that's okay at this point. We can always just trim that off later on. Give it a wipe as you just saw me do, and then you can put that on one side and get to the next one. Just one small tip before we finish up on the gluing. When you're trying to insert these little tips, obviously it's going to be almost impossible to try and pick those up and get glue on them. So the way I do it is get some glue on the pointed end of the bamboo skewer and just insert it in like so. And then you can push the end piece in, and it's as simple as that. Don't worry if the air pressure inside these tubes pushes out the little plug to start with. Just allow the glue a little bit of time to go off, and then you can push it in, and this time it will stay in there. And do that for any of the ones that are sticking out. And of course, you're almost ready to be painting next. There we go. Now the glue's dried, I've taken a few minutes just to do a bit of tidy up. I've taken the length of these inserts down to around about 1 centimetre. It's not critical, but 1 centimetre seems about right to me. And I've also just sanded around and rounded the edges here. Done that for all of them. And now we do get to the critical part. If we're going to insert these into these wagglers, we need to make sure that they're going to fit. So if I put that into here, that, if you really struggle, it might just go in, but at this point in time, that's going to be a real problem if you don't shave it down a bit. It's not an actual issue to do. Just take your knife and just shave it down. Just work your way around as you're doing it. Very simple. You could do this with sandpaper as well, but I find this bit is actually easier doing it with the knife. Just be careful, of course, you don't cut yourself. If I take the float again, still a bit tight. Try that. Yeah, now we're actually getting there. It's a nice sliding fit, but it's not quite as loose as I want it to be. And as I've said all along here, take off small amounts at a time and then check. If you take too much off, you can't put it back on again, so you're going to ruin the part you're dealing with at the time. What I'm actually aiming for is a nice sliding fit. There we go. So it's loose. And the reason I want it that way is because we're going to use the paint to build it up and make us a nice tight fit in there. But of course, you're never going to make this totally accurate by just doing what I've done there. So it may take 2, 3 or possibly even 4 coats of paint on there to just build up the amount of thickness we need. And then it'll sit on there beautifully. Well, that's all 30 of the new inserts now done. Luckily, I didn't have to remake all of these ones down here because it does get a bit tedious to do. But at this point, it does pay you to take real care to make that a nice sliding fit, as you see. I've just got one final thing to do before I go to paint, and that is to just round off these edges at the top, which I have to admit I did forget about earlier on. To make things easier for painting, I'm going to use some of these offcuts here from the hollow tubes from the ballpoint pens. All you do, take the insert you want, leave the end that's going to be inserted bare, and then just put this on to the other end. Then I can paint that without getting my hand all covered in paint. For these thicker ones, I don't need to use the same method as I just showed you. I'm just going to hold here and then spray all of this. Of course it will leave a little bit free of spray there, but basically we're going to be painting over that with the tip colours anyway, so that won't become an issue. And the same of course for the balsa ones. So as before, when we did the bodies, I'm going to use this same spray paint and exactly the same technique and just do all 30 of these inserts. So that's all 30 of them painted then, just a light coat to start with. They will be getting 2 coats, but I've got to wait for this one to dry. Once this first coat's dry on the balsa ones, I will be giving them a very light sanding, just in case any of those hairs stick up from the grain caused by when I was just sanding them down initially. As soon as we've done that, it's just a question of getting the coloured tips on, and we're more or less ready to go. All of the tips have now had 2 coats of the spray paint, and the ones which are the thicker ones, which are made of balsa wood, in between the first and second coat, I just gave it one of those light sandings as I showed you before with the very fine wet and dry sandpaper. Also, I found that I went a bit too far by taking these down. I made them a little bit too thin, and that can happen. What I did have to do though was to, you probably won't be able to see this, but I've actually had to use some polyurethane varnish and just paint it on with a brush for the last sort of centimetre or so in here. It's taken me a couple of coats to build it up, but you do need to get the correct fit. And as I said to you before, this is critical. You have to get this right. Okay, so that's all those done. Now it's just a question of putting the tip colours on. I use this water-based acrylic, which I managed to buy in the local tackle shop, although as with all these things, I've now found it's been discontinued by the shop, so I'll probably have to find something else. But a lot of people who make floats make them with acrylic paint. So just go down to your local stores, I'm sure you'll find what you need. As for the tips themselves, as I said to you previously, I'm going to make them with a red, black and yellow tip, and obviously I'm going to have different lengths and different thicknesses, which you've already seen. Now I happen to like the idea of making the tip colours come all the way down here, and the reason for that is purely and simply that I use a thing called a telltale shot, about that far from the hook, so when the fish picks up the bait, the float often just rises in the water, and by having these gradations on here, I can see exactly what's happening. A lot of people don't do that, they just have this tip section here. You paint them how you like them. Just remember to take off these plastic inserts off the thinner ones. You don't want to be painting the wrong end or anything like that, so make sure you get those off first of all. Remember we put these on just for doing the black part. Just before you start painting, you may have some slight ridges from where you took this plastic tube off the top there. If you have, just take a piece of the wet and dry and just go over each of the floats and just make sure you've sanded all this flat. The last thing you want is a horrible looking ridge on the top of your float. The first colour you put on is always the base white coat, and this needs 2 coats. Now I'm going to show you how I do it, and I'm going to do it on these thicker tips so you can see properly. I'll just move this down a bit so you can see. There we go. So get a reasonably thin paintbrush, dip it in and start the painting. Now you could of course just dip this straight in here because that'll give you a straight edge, but then what I found is you get a great big thick layer of paint on there which you have to then scrape off. So I do it this way, hold my hands so I've got both of the hand parts here just resting on the bench, and then keeping it very still, just spin the float around like so. And if you get this right, take a bit of care over it, you get a perfectly reasonable edge there. You can always touch it up like this as you go along, but then it's a question of just spreading the paint all the way up, and we'll do this for 2 coats as I said before. Get a good even layer on, check it to make sure that you've got no sort of darker spots where you've made the paint too thin. There we go. And that's the first coat on. When you're doing the thinner tips, that's when we can use these offcuts from the hollow plastic tubes. But this time, of course, you put them on the end which is going to be inserted because you're going to be painting the other end here. Just saves you getting paint all over your hands. So that's all of them now had 2 coats of white paint. Just a question of letting it dry, and then I can get the tip colours all painted up. And here we are. We've now got 3 full sets of the main floats, plus 3 full sets of each of the inserts, all painted up and ready to go. And that's all there is to making my loaded bodied wagglers with plug-in tips, folks. Having said that, if you decide that you want to do something different, even if you don't do what I've done, feel free to experiment. For example, I just picked up some of these reeds here. These are the reeds that I got from the riverbank, these hollow reeds, and I've put inserts in them of different thicknesses and whatever. So you could substitute my hollow tubes for these. If you can get your hands on peacock quill, feel free to use that. I wouldn't suggest you use balsa though, because that can be a bit brittle and they do tend to snap. But as I say, hopefully I've given you a good grounding on how to go about making loaded bodied wagglers. But of course, that then moves across into other types of floats as well. Anyway, that's it for this one. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, click the like button. If you want to subscribe, you can do that too. And until the next time, bye for now.